Charlotte Henry on how the media covers conflicts. This is MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is supported by Headspace. Meditation made simple. Visit headspace.com/MacVoices for a free 1-month trial. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. So folks, today's a little bit different. Charlotte Henry and I recorded a piece that was going to be published, and then we discovered some technical problems with it. So we were able to resurrect, or save, I should say, the best part of that particular part of the discussion, but we had to re-record some of it, and so we just decided to say the heck with it. We're going to cover two topics instead of the one we did. So in the second part of MacVoices, you will hear our original discussion that has to do with privacy and the internet and some questionable activities. But this time we're going to cover something a little bit different as part of the re-record. So Charlotte Henry, welcome sort of back to MacVoices before you got here. I don't know what it is. It's a time warp.
Let's do the time warp again. It's fine.
Yeah. Perfect.
I'm happy to spend time with you always. So I'm glad we get to have an extra conversation, even though what we might talk about is is very unpleasant and difficult.
Absolutely. I agree on all counts, Charlotte. And what we're dancing around here is I asked Charlotte if she'd mind talking a little bit about the media's reaction, and from her perspective, of course, in the UK, but the media's reaction to the war in Ukraine, how it's being covered, how it's being reacted to from a media standpoint. Because we all know that, in the era of questionable news sources, fake news and all that, everybody has an angle. Everybody seems to have an opinion. And right now, this is something that's near and dear to a lot of us because a lot of us have friends in the Ukraine and are concerned about them. And so, Charlotte, I'm going to throw it open to you. I mean, how do you think that the media is covering this, and all aspects of the media are covering this?
So there's definitely a couple of bits. The way of you framing it as all aspects of the media is definitely the way to do it, because there's different elements. So I think one thing that we've seen is, for all we talk about the power of social and, all of that, what we have learned is that when in a crisis, everyone goes back to their traditional outlets. In the UK, the BBC News has been the kind of anchor of all, people's perceptions and coverage. There's also been some amazing work done by the team at Sky News, including one team one of the correspondents and his crew were actually ambushed and shot at by, they think, Russian saboteurs, and had to shield. One was hit, and they all have left the country okay, as far as I understand it. But there was some very, very deeply worrying video from the Sky News team out there as well. But so these traditional outlets have the capacity to step up in these awful circumstances in ways that other outlets don't. I've watched a bit of the CNN coverage as well, and it's a similar story, isn't it? These organizations have capacity that lots of places simply do not, and the experience that lots of places simply do not. And so this is when they come into their own. There's amazing work from a presenter called Clive Myrie on the BBC News. The other correspondents out there, Orla Guerin, Lise Doucette, have all been doing amazing work out there. There's others who I forget as well. But of course, I've seen this described actually as the first TikTok war as well, which is a kind of worrying and quite a bizarre phrase to say. But I can understand where it's come from, because we've seen so much video content come out of the Ukraine and onto our For You pages that you can see how people have got that perception as well. Never mind the constant flow of information we get through Twitter, pictures on and video on Instagram, and so on. It is a combination of all those things. But I do think the anchor, fascinatingly, is always actually these traditional news outlets in moments like this.
So the first thing, I'm sure people are going to say, hey, I tuned into MacVoices. What's all this Ukraine war coverage stuff? But, we talk a lot about tech adjacent things here. And I think the TikTok war comment is especially interesting. We've seen,
And
plenty
also,
of.
we should mention. Sorry to interrupt. We should
Yeah,
mention that the Ukraine is home to a thriving tech scene and home to Apple software that I'm sure lots of people listening have used. You and I both know the people at MacPaw and Readle and those places who I have been in touch with and are living this. We're talking about it; they're living it, and so this is the Ukraine is home of a important tech scene, and tech adjacent. We shouldn't forget that either. This is not some, particularly for me in Europe, it's not some far off land. This is it's a European country, a European city with, as we say, thriving tech scene, thriving culture, and so on.
Yeah, and I don't want to leave anybody out. You're right. MacPaw, the makers of SetApp,
Mhm.
Readle, BeVite Software, Grammarly. I mean, the list goes on and
Grammarly,
on,
yeah.
folks. There are plenty of articles out there, but it's a very strange experience. We're all, depending on what age you are, you're used to seeing war movies, and boy, isn't that horrible. But that was a different time, and it could never happen now. And now Charlotte and I are both in the position of having friends, people we know that have had dinner with and, would run up and give a hug to at a trade show. They're living in bomb shelters. It
Yeah,
just,
well, I hosted at the WWDC, must have been 2020 WWDC. I hosted an event for MacPaw.
yeah. I mean, it's just, it's crazy stuff that's going on now. So that's why we're addressing it here. But the TikTok war is a great point. I mean, we have more people have more cameras, more video cameras in their hands probably than ever before.
And high quality.
And high quality. And this is being documented in a way that, nothing else. I mean, there've been political unrest situations in a lot of places, but not quite like this. And I'm fascinated by, how those media platforms are being used to spread opinion, but also, watching some of them shut down certain accounts, whether that is a right thing or a wrong thing, whether they're propaganda or whether it's just somebody else's point of view. These are tough questions, and they're also questions we will get to in the part of the interview that Charlotte and I recorded before this. But I mean, Charlotte, is it a good idea for any of these places to be shutting things down?
I mean, there's so many layers of that to unpack. I wouldn't even try and give, a straight answer. I'm sorry for that, but as I say, there's so many layers to it. I mean, we've seen lots of the social media companies who I think have learned through elections, COVID, all the issues where they've been blamed for disinformation or for allowing it to spread. They are now responding and are having to respond to something, as you say, they haven't really dealt with in the time. TikTok is, well, as particularly in the Western world, is very new. Facebook's a bit older, but and has had difficult things to deal with. But this is obviously a live war in Europe. Same for Twitter. They're all, if you go to any of the company's press pages or whatever, they're all making announcements explaining how they're trying to mitigate things. I can't believe any of it will be perfect. But obviously what's important isn't there that cliche, the first casualty of war is truth or something? And I think we are seeing this. But interestingly, we've also seen things like, President Zelensky in Ukraine using social media and using videos really powerfully to connect with people both in his country and without it, and to explain the situation on the ground. Obviously, Russia is taking actions that have led lots of social media companies and brought in laws that mean social media companies can't operate there anymore, don't feel they can operate anymore, which limits the amount of kind of information that Russian citizens can get. And I guess it also limits the way Russian citizens, we've seen pictures of huge demonstrations against the war within Russia from ordinary citizens, and I guess some of that organization is hampered as well if social media is hampered. So there's so many different dynamics to it, and I think the companies are really having to learn in real time, which I guess in some ways sounds bizarre because you would like to think as powerful companies as this have planned for stuff, but equally, particularly having endured 2 years of criticism throughout the pandemic in different ways, but yet here we are, and they clearly are having to respond and learn in real time and develop policies in real time.
So that's a really interesting concept that I hadn't exactly thought about that way, that they're having to learn as they go in this situation. Because this does feel so much different than any of the other political unrest situations, whether there was some violence involved or not. That okay, this is a bit of a test ground for what they shouldn't do, what they should or shouldn't show, or who they should or shouldn't cut off. That's maybe we all need to be a little more tolerant of some of their decisions. I'm not suggesting that we don't have our opinions about their decisions, but just understand that they too, they're trying to figure out where the black side of the line is and the white side of the line is, and unfortunately, it's just a big muddy gray.
In lots of cases, yes, because everyone wants to have realistic information, but there's not necessarily a muddy line between truth and not truth. That's a slightly different thing. Whether you're saying, this is getting into very murky ground, but whether you're saying should nothing from anyone associated with the Russian state be permitted on social media, or that kind of thing, that's how I accept is difficult ground. But it's not difficult ground something that's true or not true. Things like images that we're told are from current day Ukraine that are not. That stuff you can filter out and deal with. And these companies surely have the resources to do that.
Yeah, good point. Good point. This edition of Mac Voices is supported by Headspace. Headspace is meditation made simple. Go on, have a think. Take a minute. How are you feeling? We all say fine when we don't really mean it. Fine isn't really an emotion, is it? How many times have you told yourself you're fine when all you really feel is anger or sadness or nerves? Headspace is scientifically proven to help you manage your feelings and your mental health. In fact, a recent study proved in just 2 weeks, Headspace can reduce your stress by 14%. That's a lot of stress reduced. Whether you want to relieve stress and anxiety, sleep better, or improve your focus, Headspace is your everyday dose of mindfulness for real life. There are lots of stressful things going on in the world today. Many of those we can't do much about, but they still stress us out. Why not do something that you can do something about? Get your stress under control with Headspace. However you are feeling, try Headspace at headspace.com/MacVoices and get 1 month free of their entire mindfulness library. This is the best Headspace offer available, so go to headspace.com/MacVoices today. headspace.com/MacVoices. Thanks to Headspace for their support of Mac Voices. You also mentioned the Ukrainian president's presence on social media and on mainstream media as well.
Absolutely.
And I think it's been interesting. He seems to be doing a great job of leveraging that to show a lot of things. He's also acquitting himself quite well as president, probably better than a lot of presidents of a lot of countries have done in the past. But that's another discussion. That's a dangerous discussion. But I'm a little surprised, at least here in the West, at least in the US, I see very little in the way of actual statements by Putin or any of his lieutenants. And I'm curious to see if that's the same in the UK.
I think I have definitely seen when he has made kind of address either the Russian public or the world more broadly, that definitely has filtered into British news coverage for sure.
Okay.
I couldn't tell you, just because actually at certain points I've just found it all too depressing. I've had to turn off the rolling news. I couldn't tell you authoritatively if people have run that live or whatever. But there certainly has been issue. There certainly has been reporting on what he has said if he has made public statements.
Charlotte, recognizing you're a journalist, I'm not. Okay, I think we make that point in the next section too. Do you think that do we have obligations to look at these things? And we're doing it now. So right or wrong, whether you agree with it or not, we're doing it right now. But do you think we have an obligation to talk about some of these things?
What do you mean specifically in terms of like misinformation, the power of platforms at moments like this?
And your insight into the fact that all these platforms are learning. They're still learning what they should do.
I hope we have an obligation because it's the kind of thing I write about. So I do, not to make light of it, but let me put it this way. The reason I find this stuff interesting to write and report on is because I think it matters. Of course, we mentioned the tech scene in the Ukraine. Apple has obviously been impacted by the situation as well, has made the decision to not operate in Russia. That's a big decision for a big company to make. So, there's situations like this impact all facets of media, of technology. And I think, you and I are very much not foreign or war correspondents. And there are some amazing people doing that work. But there's also other elements. You can argue they're less important, but there are other elements to what's going on that also deserve, some attention as well. So that we get a wider picture of the perspective. I'm not saying this conversation is the stuff we've touched on. This conversation is more important than actually reporting on what's happening on the ground. I would never claim that, but I think there is value in understanding wider context of things.
I think that's well said. The wider context part, because the war correspondents, and I'm with you. I would not want to do that job. I have the utmost respect for them. But they have their faces up against the glass. We have the luxury of leaning back, being just a little farther away, and seeing maybe patterns they can't, or aspects of it that are not immediately obvious if you're literally on the ground. So,
and luxury is exactly the word. We're sitting in our nice, comfortable homes while they're on the ground.
Yeah. How do you feel about Apple? And I saw this morning as we record this, Microsoft, but so many companies pulling out of Russia or refusing to do business with Russia. Do you think that's as effective a weapon as maybe we'd like it to be?
Trying to approach this without going into the kind of politics and the foreign policy and kind of defense policy, which I'm very much no expert in, particularly in that part of the world. I would suggest that given the tools the West has at its reasonable disposal, big companies and economics sanctions seem to be the thing we most have and are able to leverage. And obviously the trading environment is very difficult for those companies as well. So, it's the cynic in me would say it's good PR for those companies, and also look at how, given the erratic nature currently of the Russian economy, it doesn't suit them to be involved in the economy anyway, but that doesn't mean they haven't made the right decision. Look at what recently Apple had times when it stopped trading in Turkey, didn't it? Because the currency there was very erratic and it paused deals there for a time. And, you can see whatever the political fallout was, you can see the business case for doing that as well, given what's happened to the Russian ruble. But I also think, these companies are big, powerful entities, and, we are entitled to expect them to do what we would perceive as the right thing.
Yeah, that's a discussion I'd love to have sometime, get a panel together, because the doing the right thing, and I'm not suggesting I'm second guessing here under these circumstances at all. So please, nobody beat on me about that.
Yeah.
But the right thing is the right thing from whose perspective? And right now it seems.
There are lots of cases where that's pretty grey. I think most people would not consider that there to be a particularly murky line in this particular instance.
I would hope so.
This is a much more clear-cut example, I would say, for the companies to make that decision on.
Yeah, I would hope so. And Charlotte, I know. I mean, you obviously, being in the UK, are a lot closer to the situation because much of.
I mean,
Eastern
Europe is still pretty far away.
Well, relatively speaking, but I think here in the U.S., oil production is a big thing, and we have the ability to maybe ramp up some oil production. From what I understand, and this is I've got to rely on the mainstream media for some of this, but you all have a much greater dependence on Russian oil, and so
I think that is a greater problem in the European continent than the UK. But I think from what I understand as a broad statement, all countries have a level of reliance, some more than others.
Yeah. So.
And that's about as in-depth on that. That's about as in-depth on a topic I know next to nothing about as I'm prepared to go on that particular instance.
No, I'm the same. But at the same time, you look at it and you listen. We all, at some level, we all have to be just a little selfish and figure out, okay, how is this going to affect me and my lifestyle and the way I want to live? You and I are certainly not being affected like our friends in the Ukraine, but I know gas prices here have been steadily climbing over the past few days. That means that the price of literally everything is going to go up. And
that's certainly true here. It was already true before the war, and has been exacerbated by the situation in Ukraine. That's absolutely true.
And therefore, I think it's important for folks to kind of remember this. Whether you tuned into MacVoices or not to hear Mac stuff and Apple stuff, these are circumstances and things that are going to affect all of us one way or another.
I mean, it really will. Think about how, issues in Chinese chip factories affected us getting the kind of products and cars and all the kind of things people care about. This situation is in lots of ways a more extreme, immediate version of that, and much harder to navigate around because there is an actual horrendous war going on. And
yeah, it's we talk a lot about things being a global economy, and it's a global community now, and this is the kind of thing that I think brings that home, that now it's not just somebody in some other country that's fighting with somebody else in some other country. It's friends of ours that are under the gun, and it's situations like this that are affecting our lives and then affecting them very quickly. That you realize how interdependent we all are and how much we need to, I guess, try to understand each other's positions and work together to compromise instead of becoming so separated.
Yes, although there's obviously also a time and a place to stand up for yourself and the things you believe in, and in this case, your independence and sovereignty as a country, perhaps. Again, I understand that. That's what the Ukrainian people would argue, isn't it? That they are standing up for themselves as an independent nation. Yes, but also you're absolutely right to point out that we have seen, from, as you say, us communicating with people who we know from the tech world to world leaders mobilizing. You can, the idea that, and I say this on an island, none of us are an island really anymore. We have those connections.
Yeah. Well, think about what we're doing. I'm in Pennsylvania, you're in the UK, and we're having this conversation in real time.
Yes, hello from London, yes.
Yes. What does that tell you about how small the world has gotten? So.
And one day maybe I'll get to meet you in person, Chuck. Wouldn't that be nice?
I hope so. Whether I come there or you come here, we have to make it happen.
It would be very nice.
So Charlotte will be back in the next section of MacVoices, the one that we recorded before this and that we had the difficulties with. But the meat of the interview and that discussion, it's in light of this discussion, it may seem just a little more frivolous, but it's still pretty important because of concerns of privacy and security and who has what rights in the world that we just described as being much, much smaller. So I hope you will join us in the next edition of MacVoices, the second part of this, which kind of was actually the first, depending on how you look at it. Until the next time, and as always, I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.